Hello and welcome. You're listening to Catalyst Talks, conversations with change agents, outliers, superheroes, and truly conscious leaders modeling what it is to be an unstoppable force for good in this world. What lit these catalysts on fire to do their work, and what nuggets of wisdom can they share with a world literally on fire? This podcast is for you who cares deeply and seeks to catalyze the world. I'm your host, Stephanie Trager. I'm a consciousness catalyst and soul coach to superstar change agents in business, leadership, and life. In this podcast, I wear an eclectic mix of hats, including earthkeeper, healer, mindset coach, lawyer, business, sustainability, and impact strategist. My intention is holding space for higher purpose, peak wellness, and soul mastery so we can live in harmony with ourselves, each other, and nature. The whole idea of Catalyst Talks in these conversations is to awaken consciousness, unlock higher purpose, and learn what it really takes to catalyze change in that scale. Subscribe to our new podcast and help us grow. We're aiming to reach 1 million people at least in 2020. Let's wake up the world together. This is one of my most important episodes yet. Steven Donziger is a human rights and environmental justice attorney. He's a renowned advocate, writer, and public speaker focusing on and addressing human rights abuse and corporate malfeasance. He's been mired for 27 years in the most historical litigation effort ever to hold an oil company, Chevron, accountable for intentionally causing one of the worst oil-related catastrophes in the world and harming indigenous and farmer communities in the Amazon and Ecuador. He and his team won the $9.5 billion judgment against Chevron, who's evaded this judgment at all costs. At the time of this taping, Steven is experiencing a vicious retaliatory action by the oil giant and 2 U.S. federal judges demonstrating clear judicial misconduct. Please listen to Steven's message, learn about this issue, and share widely. You can find his full bio in the show notes at catalysttalks.com. Steven, I've been following your journey and the case against Chevron, their case against you, for over a decade, since my early days in law. Today, I'm coming with a beginner's mind because I want whoever is listening to fully understand your experience, what this is all about, and the implications of the Chevron in Ecuador or the Donziger case. So what is this really about? Who are you, and how is this impacting your life?
Thank you. It's good to be here on your podcast. I got out of law school in 1991. I'm originally from Florida, and I became a public defender and ultimately found myself in Ecuador at the invitation of a lawyer in Massachusetts named Cristobal Bonifaz, who is originally from Ecuador and who was investigating what he told me was a egregious environmental catastrophe caused by Texaco, which had gone down into Ecuador and the Amazon in the 1960s and had drilled hundreds of wells in a very sensitive ecosystem and used extremely shoddy, if not criminal production practices, meaning that they deliberately discharged billions and billions of gallons of cancer-causing toxic oil waste into the Amazon environment, onto the ancestral lands of the indigenous groups that were living there, and that they had done this deliberately over many years as a way to save money. I accepted Cristobal's invitation and we organized a group, and in April of 1993 we went down to the affected area, which is enormous. It's 1,500 square miles, and saw with our own eyes what Cristobal had described to me, and it was horrific. It was apocalyptic. It's something I really can never forget, that first trip. Seeing huge open, unlined waste pits full of oil sludge. Texaco had built hundreds of these pits, and many of them they had put pipes in the side to drain the contents out into nearby creeks and rivers and streams that the local people relied on for their drinking water and their bathing and their fishing. And the whole system had been set up in a way that not only was deliberate, but really was systematically on a daily basis putting literally millions of gallons of this waste material into the environment where people lived. And, this isn't New York City or Los Angeles. People do not have tap water. They don't have running water. They're totally dependent on the pristine, beautiful, natural environment for their sustenance, to survive, for their water. And until Texaco had come, that environment produced naturally everything the people who lived in that area needed to have prosperous lives. The surface waters were clean and beautiful, and there was abundant plant life and food and animals to hunt. And little by little, This started in 1964 and went until 1992. It is still going on because all the waste was left out there. Little by little, this entire area became severely poisoned. Texaco was just utterly disrespectful, outright racist toward the indigenous peoples when they were started to question what was happening to their environment. Why was there this black stuff in their streams and their rivers? The Texaco engineers said, "Oh no, that's oil. It's medicinal. It's good for you. It's like vitamins in milk." And there was a mass industrial poisoning over time to the point where by the early 1990s, when I first went down there and continuing to today, hundreds, if not thousands of people have died of cancer. There's virtually no medical care in the region. Basically, Texaco, now Chevron. Chevron bought Texaco in 2001. Cut and run. In other words, they pulled billions and billions of dollars of profits out of this region, left behind what is called the Amazon Chernobyl, really the worst oil-related disaster on the planet. And it's been there almost 50 years now. I'll say this before I explain sort of my personal story. If you compare what Texaco and Chevron have done in Ecuador to what BP did in the United States in the 2010 Deepwater Horizon spill in the Gulf of Mexico, a lot of people remember that. That was a massive, massive spill. Since 2010, BP has paid $65 billion in compensation and fines in one form or another. People might remember within a few weeks, without even a court judgment, BP created a $20 billion fund to compensate people. In contrast, in Ecuador, what Texaco and Chevron did was deliberate. It was not an accident. It was in a far greater, wider, more delicate ecosystem than the Gulf. And it impacted over time thousands and thousands and thousands of more people. Yet Chevron has yet to pay a penny for what happened, even though the people affected won a historic court judgment with the help of me and other lawyers in 2011. It's a real flagrant example, in my view, of corporate irresponsibility, corporate environmental criminality, and corporate abuse of the legal system to block compensation that is legally owed to people who have been severely harmed. Many have died over a 50-year period. Overall, the world needs to pay attention to this. It's a severe problem. It connects with the climate change issue in the biggest way, because if oil companies like Chevron are allowed to go into sensitive ecosystems and essentially externalize billions and billions of dollars of production costs onto the backs of indigenous peoples and vulnerable peoples, there's going to be a massive over-drilling in our world at precisely the time when the fossil fuel industry needs to slow down, if not stop altogether, in order to save the planet. So we see this case not only as one involving environmental justice for indigenous peoples and other rural communities in Ecuador, tens of thousands of people, but also one that's essential to create a new standard of legal accountability for polluters who are accelerating global warming and accelerating the destruction of the planet. And already we've seen some positive impacts from the case, from the verdict, even though they haven't paid. We're seeing, if it's possible to imagine this, more responsible behavior in this part of the world from oil companies generally than had existed before the lawsuit, but there's still a huge problem. There's still an enormous way to go. And rather than pay the judgment and comply with the law, Chevron has spent the last 10 years attacking the lawyers, including me. They've literally hired 60 law firms, used 2,000 lawyers, spent probably $2-3 billion, not on a cleanup, but on paying their own lawyers to go after people like me and others. So I'll stop there, but this is an extremely important situation, and it's very important people pay attention to it.
Thank you. Thank you. So that you really gave a nice high level picture of what is going on. The case was filed in 1993, right? And
Yes.
Since then, you've been on a journey. Where are you now? Let's start with where you are right now, why, and then kind of take us through this journey of accountability.
Well, right now I live in New York, and I've lived in New York for the most part since the beginning of my involvement in this case. I've traveled from New York to the affected area to Ecuador more than 250 times over 25 years. I am extremely close to a lot of people in Ecuador, team members, other lawyers, and technical people and scientists, and of course the affected communities and their leadership. This is a case controlled and driven by the affected communities. I serve as a lawyer at their pleasure, and it's an honor to represent the people affected, an extreme honor. Now, when I started, I never expected to work on this for so long. I never expected the legal system to be so frankly dysfunctional that it cannot resolve a case in a reasonable amount of time. You know, that this is year 27 of the case, and it's largely due to Chevron's strategy of obstructionism, of hiring lawyers to try to grind us down, sap our resources, sap our will, so people essentially give up. And Chevron has a massive amount of money. You know, a lot of that money was taken out, in my opinion, illegally from Ecuador by not drilling in a proper way, which created, higher profits than Texaco would otherwise have been entitled to. But what's really interesting is after we won, the case got a lot of publicity. There was a segment on 60 Minutes, for example, in 2009. Chevron hired a new law firm called Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher, and they convinced Chevron they could turn the tables on us by alleging the whole case was a fraud. And in a nutshell, what happened is they sued me, all 47 named plaintiffs, meaning the people who represent the class of everyone affected. They sued scientists, community leaders back in New York under the RICO statute. They basically alleged that the entire case was a sham, that it was a racketeering conspiracy led by me to extort money from them, even though Ecuador's courts in the venue where Chevron insisted the trial be held, where Chevron accepted jurisdiction, had reviewed literally hundreds of thousands of pages of evidence, 105 technical evidentiary reports, reams of witness testimony, and had concluded that for what was visible to the naked eye, what I had seen on my first trip back in 1993, that there was a massive amount of pollution. It was done deliberately. Texaco and now Chevron was responsible. To them, it's all just a big game. So they sued me in 2011 for the most amount of money that an American citizen has ever been sued for, $60 billion, which is treble damages at that time, the judgment against them was $20 billion. I am a human rights lawyer. I live in a small apartment in Manhattan with my wife and son. There's no bank, financial institution. You think of all the wrongdoing that's happened at high levels in our society that's ever been sued for anything close to that amount of money. But a human rights lawyer, he gets sued for $60 billion. So over time, Chevron began to intensify its attack on me, and they ended up dropping all the money damages claims against me to avoid a jury trial in the United States. And they got a judge named Louis A. Kaplan who oversaw the case without a jury. Judge Kaplan is well known for having sympathies for big business and corporations. He treated my clients terribly during this case, which we felt was completely unjustified in every way, shape, or form. The case was being litigated in Ecuador, and this was just a way to try to turn the tables with a friendly judge. He hid the identities of some of their witnesses. He never acknowledged the Ecuadorians were real. He called them the so-called plaintiffs on a number of occasions. He claimed that Chevron was extremely important to the economy and needed special deference. He ruled without even an evidentiary hearing that the Ecuadorians could not enforce their judgment against Chevron's assets anywhere in the world, not just in New York where he was. And in my opinion, he became a laughingstock of kind of American judicial imperialism. Is really the only way to describe it. That's how Deepak Gupta, my appellate lawyer, very respected lawyer, described it. And Kaplan was overturned by the Second Circuit on the issue of trying to block the Ecuadorians from, exercising their right to enforce their judgment in other countries outside the United States. But he kept going. And there was a trial, and I wasn't able to defend myself, and it was pretty reverse engineered in my view. It wasn't a fair trial. And he found against me and all my clients and ultimately ruled that we cannot enforce the judgment out of Ecuador against Chevron in the United States. And subsequent to that, we kept working. We filed enforcement actions in other countries, including in Canada, where the Canadian Supreme Court and several appellate courts issued a series of rulings in our favor. Judge Kaplan's very flawed racketeering case against me and others was under scrutiny for the fact that he had allowed Chevron to pay its star witness $2 million. And they coached him for 53 days, and he got on the stand and he lied about me. He lied that I was involved in some sort of bribe in Ecuador, which is not true. This witness later admitted that he had lied repeatedly before Judge Kaplan, but Judge Kaplan never changed his decision. And all of this was coming to the fore in other countries in a way that I think threatened Judge Kaplan's legacy and his reputation. And Chevron was starting to get very nervous with our progress in Canada. And ultimately, they came up with what I call their second scheme.
Before you go into the second scheme, just give us a timeline here. So you started in 1993. Then when was the first judgment?
Started in 1993. We tried to get the case in the United States in the 1990s, but Texaco, then Chevron, won the battle to send it to Ecuador where they accepted the jurisdiction. So the same case started up in Ecuador's courts in 2001, and it ran until 2011 when the courts in Ecuador ruled in our favor. And then subsequent to that, 3 appellate courts affirmed the judgment, including the highest court in Ecuador, the Supreme Court of Ecuador. In the meantime, as that was playing out, the same year that we won the judgment, Chevron sued me back in New York, sued me and my clients. That was 2011. So while the Ecuadorians began to enforce the judgment, Chevron, through Judge Kaplan, was collaterally attacking us in the United States. So these things were happening on parallel tracks. And Judge Kaplan issued his ruling in 2014 while the case was being enforced in Canada as a way to undermine the Canadian enforcement action. In 2015, we won an incredibly significant, historic decision, unanimous decision from Canada's Supreme Court in our favor. And in 2018, Judge Kaplan ruled that I was in contempt of court for continuing to work on the case, raise money for the case, which I completely disagree with for various reasons. As a result of that, he ordered me, among other things, to turn over my confidential case file to Chevron, my computer, including my computer and cell phone. And I'm a rule of law guy. I meticulously comply with court orders, even when they're wrong. In this particular instance, I appealed it. Judge Kaplan's order was unprecedented. No one's ever heard of a lawyer being ordered to turn over his confidential information, including his communications with other lawyers, with his clients, etc., to his adversary in the middle of litigation. So I appealed it, and during the appeal, Judge Kaplan charged me with criminal contempt for not turning over my computer and cell to Chevron, among other things. And he presented his charges to the U.S. Attorney's Office. They rejected the case. Kaplan went ahead anyway and appointed a private law firm and told them to prosecute me. And it turns out that this law firm, even though they hid this fact for 7 months, has Chevron as a client. And they're prosecuting me in the name of the U.S. government, which is unprecedented.
So let's help people understand that. So Judge Kaplan, a federal judge in New York, is linked to the law firm, has appointed the law firm that has Chevron as a client to prosecute you.
In the name of the government, and deprive me of my liberty because they put me in home detention where I've been for 11 months. I'm the only person I know of in U.S. history with no criminal record, charged with a misdemeanor, in home detention for 11 months when the maximum sentence is 6 months. To me, it's unjust, it's unfair, and I'm wrongfully detained. And a lot of lawyers around the world have concluded that, who've looked at this. They've written letters and complaints, and the people who look at these kinds of wrongful detentions around the world are pretty much shocked to see this in the United States, to a lawyer. Something that normally happens in a country like Syria or Saudi Arabia, Turkey, North Korea is happening right here in New York to me. It's a very, very irregular situation. I mean, it's not right. It's obviously a case of corporate political retaliation facilitated by the courts. People, again, need to pay attention. I mean, what's fascinating is here you have, on the one hand, in 2011, one of the most historic legal victories of all time in the environmental justice, corporate accountability, and indigenous rights movements. And the reaction is so deeply intense by big oil. It's deeply, in my opinion, racist. They cannot accept the fact that people in Ecuador have the power over them to win a legal case, particularly with the help of lawyers from the North and donors and financial investors from the North who've sustained this critically important case for so many years. So they're, trying to take it all out on us, and particularly on me. And it's frightening. But again, people need to pay attention. I have been detained as a human rights lawyer for 11 months in my apartment in Manhattan in a completely unjustified way on a false theory that I'm some sort of risk of flight and I'm going to flee the jurisdiction when I face a misdemeanor charge that in itself is highly questionable.
Especially now where you can't really fly anyway during this, the Ecuador's borders are closed. You mentioned how other attorneys in other countries, other human rights lawyers gain sort of recognition for injustices. And the American Bar Association has a justice defenders program. And I actually was scrolling through it looking for you. Like, why aren't you on there? You're under house detention now. You lost your license, right? Your law license. And what happened with that?
Just to be clear, this is another kind of aspect to Chevron's attacks on me. My law license was suspended without a hearing in 2018 based entirely on Judge Kaplan's completely flawed, if not false, findings. And this was engineered by the State Bar Grievance Office at the request of several judges who are on the bench with Judge Kaplan. And they basically suggested I have my license suspended under a statute that allows people deemed an immediate threat to the public order, they don't get a hearing. So based on winning this great environmental justice case against Chevron, I was basically deemed a threat to the public order, and my law license was suspended. Subsequent to that, I demanded a hearing. And 13 people, many of them prominent lawyers, came in and testified as to my character and their experience with me. And the hearing officer recommended to restore my law license, which never should have been suspended to begin with. But it's only a recommendation. We'll see what the appellate court does. But, the reality is the only neutral hearing officer ever to look at what Judge Kaplan did has ruled in my favor. And that really should tell you a lot.
Over this time period, how much money has Chevron actually spent? They had a $9.5 billion that they had to pay towards reparations and the indigenous and the local communities. How much have they spent in this defense, vicious, vindictive attack against you?
As of 2013, we were able to verify that they had used 60 different law firms and 2,000 lawyers, and there's been another 7 years since then. So I think that number has gone up. We estimate they've spent at least $2 to $3 billion on legal fees and other costs to fight this.
Wow.
It might be the most expensive, corporate defense / retaliation case in history. The corporate defense bar, particularly this firm Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher, has made hundreds of millions of dollars, if not over $1 billion in fees from fighting some of the most vulnerable people on the planet. A lot of the work involved fabricating evidence with this paid witness, Alberto Guerra, and a whole host of unsavory acts by lawyers that I have to say I'm appalled by personally.
So Chevron's been spending billions of dollars to evade justice. And how have you been financing this litigation and the attacks for the past many decades?
It's been a Herculean effort to sustain the case in light of the attacks and the massive spending of Chevron. Let's start with the fact that the affected people, Stephanie, have no money. They don't have money in the way we understand money, that is cash. They have massive wealth if they had just been left alone to enjoy the fruits of their natural environment. There's very prosperous communities. Once the oil pollution struck, many of them were forced off the land and to take wage-paying jobs in the local towns, and it really disrupted the communities and the culture and created a mass amount of poverty. So obviously, the affected communities do not have the money. They need to pay lawyers who can bring this kind of complex international cross-border tort case against an American oil company. So what we did, and I'm proud to say I was one of the people who was instrumental in creating a new kind of financing model, where what we basically did is we took the claim, which was potentially, if it were to win in court, worth a lot of money, and the clients elected to get financing from outside people, third parties, to give them the money in exchange for a right to get the money back plus a little profit if there was to be a recovery down the road. In the meantime, the cash was put into the case, and it was used to hire lawyers around the world, pay technicians, pay scientists, basically to pay all the expenses that one would have in a complex toxic tort case where you're trying to prove pollution. You have to deal with laboratories and scientists and chemical sampling results and analyses and experts and all that kind of stuff, not to mention lawyers and travel and all that kind of stuff. And that money was used to sustain the case. Now, to be clear, Chevron, there was a few $1,000,000 raised over the years to pay all these expenses, but it was maybe 1/20th of 1% of what Chevron spent. But what it did do is it enabled the indigenous communities in Ecuador to get on the playing field, even though they're if it was a baseball diamond, they're still in foul territory. I mean, they were never really had enough resources to go toe to toe with Chevron, but they were on the playing field, and little by little, they were able to get into the batter's box and get up to home plate and sort of get a walk to first and stole second, and someone came in to pinch hit and ended up at third. And, it was small ball every month, every year for years and years and years, just keeping the case alive. But ultimately, to continue the analogy, they pushed enough runs across the plate to win the case because the evidence was so overwhelming. And I go back to my first trip in 1993 and what I saw with my own eyes. I mean, it was a apocalyptic environmental catastrophe visible to anyone who took the time to go into this very isolated part of the world to see it. So it didn't surprise me that the evidence against Chevron was completely overwhelming. The economic model, the financing model of the case is novel. I don't think there's ever been such a significant amount of third-party funding for indigenous peoples in a case of this nature. The financing model worked very effectively, which is one reason. And by the way, I was instrumental in sort of connecting my clients in the rainforest with many of these entities that were able to give them the funds needed to sustain this kind of case. And as a result of that, I think that's another added incentive for Chevron to attack me because, they kind of see Chevron has a lot of expertise in kind of playing the dirty game of power. And, I think Chevron has concluded for years that if they could dry up the financial support for the case, it would go away and they wouldn't have to contest these completely meritorious claims that courts have acknowledged are winning claims. So they're going after the money, and one way they're going after the money is to go after me.
Have we been having this conversation a year ago, 2 years ago? There's this there's this story. It is as egregious as it sounds, and yet here we are with this other layer. Because I've been following this journey for a long time, and here you are now under house arrest, in detention in your own apartment, and what you're talking about is a model that other people could follow, right? What you're also saying is the implications of you being successful, it might inspire other people to do the same thing. Your novel financing model is an inspiration to replicate. And what would be the implications? Like this idea that you're creating. So Chevron's not only trying to stop you, but they're trying to stop the idea. I've heard you say that before. They're trying to stop the idea of this working. And there are tons of people who are financing sustainable agriculture and clean energy, and they're looking to invest, like in impact investors who are willing to invest in the positive impact and take the risk of return. What would you want them to know about why this type of investment, like in litigation, that is around responsibility? What would you want them to know about this case? Because sometimes there's we're going to stay away from that looks a little bit too political or just too much risk. What would you want them to know?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Look, I think all of these investments in clean energy and to make the world a more sustainable place are connected to each other. And every investor needs to look at every investment, in terms of whatever the criteria he or she wants to use when investing. How much does it matter that the investment help the environment? What are the cost benefits of any investment? What's the risk portfolio you want? I mean, I get all that, and it's important that world begin to see environmental justice litigation as an investment opportunity that it's on par with, say, solar energy or other kind of attractive investments in the clean energy sector. And why do I say that? Because if you really look at what happened in Ecuador, the reason this pollution happened from a pure sort of economic analysis standpoint is the incentives were not in place for Texaco to perceive that it couldn't do this. I mean, they basically perceived it would be much cheaper to dump literally 16 billion gallons of toxic waste into the environment than it would be to actually drill properly and not do the dumping, as they can't do in most other countries that have proper environmental regulatory systems in place via their governments, which did not exist in Ecuador. So they made a calculation that they would take the risk of creating a mass industrial catastrophe that's killed thousands of people and think they could get away with it. If investing in a case that would hold a company like Chevron accountable for that kind of reckless, I would say even homicidal behavior, is critically important, because companies need to know, particularly in the fossil fuel industry, the mining industry, the extractive industries, that they cannot do this and get away with it. And unfortunately, if you look at the history of litigation, there's never been enough resources on the side of the victims of pollution compared to the side of the polluters. And what we've tried to do in this case, to, a modest degree, because we're still completely outspent by them, is to monetize hope. I mean, think about that. If you're sitting in Ecuador year after year watching a powerful company like Texaco pollute your lands, like, where do you go? You have no money. Your court system has historically not been open to you. You're an indigenous person. There's a lot of racism within Ecuador, by the way. Where do you go? How do you get access to justice? These are all critical questions. In one way is you find lawyers who can get the necessary capital to represent you properly and get you into the court system and get the evidence generated and deal with all the sort of the complexities of the case and come out the other side with a victory, as has happened. But that could not have happened without this economic model. I mean, I call it capitalism in service of human rights in the litigation sector. And by the way, I'm not saying people should just invest in litigation. I mean, there's all sorts of non-justice litigations that people invest in, by the way. I mean, it's a more and more acceptable way to invest money. Commercial litigations, people invest. I think this is a particularly interesting kind of sector. I will say this, though, just to be as clear as I can. Judge Kaplan has ordered me not to accept more investments. I mean, my clients can, and there's many other lawyers, by the way, working on this now. So it's still possible to work with that model. But because I was the one really organizing a lot of the investment in the case and donations, not just investment, people donate money. Kaplan and Chevron attacked me and claimed I shouldn't be allowed to do that in light of this RICO judgment against me. But that doesn't take anything away from the fact that the model itself is new, it's effective, and I think it creates great, great hope for victims of human rights abuses generally, victims of corporate pollution more specifically, to actually access justice and try to get compensation for the harms caused to them. By the way, I'll say this case could not have happened without outside money. I mean, the typical defense strategy for these cases is they just outspend you, grind you into the ground, file 1,000 motions, you can't keep up, and you just have to quit. We didn't have to quit. They did all that. They tried to crush us, and they're still trying. But we've made it. We're in year 27. And ultimately, I believe they will be paying this judgment. And let's not forget either, Stephanie, that the people of Ecuador have won the case. Okay, they won. It was affirmed by 3 appellate courts in Ecuador. It's been validated for enforcement purposes by multiple courts in Canada, including the Supreme Court of Canada. It's even been validated by the New York Federal Court of Appeals for enforcement purposes. It's been validated by Ecuadorian courts for enforcement purposes. So, you have all these judgments in our favor. We have won the case. And then you have this one judge, this trial judge in the United States, who without a jury is claiming that this case can't be enforced. And if I continue to work on it, I'm basically violating the criminal law. And I've been detained with no trial now for 11 months in my home on a criminal contempt charge that I'm completely contesting, that I think is extraordinary. No one's ever seen such a charge before. And I think it's motivated by behaviors that are just not appropriate either for a judge or a corporation in our legal system. And I repeat, I'm being prosecuted by a private law firm with Chevron as a client that has detained me or pushed for my detention. So I'm basically, this is, to me, is the first corporate criminal prosecution ever in the United States. That is a prosecution essentially under the control of a corporation that's been my adversary. And it should never happen. Right now, by the way, we've just filed an emergency appeal to dismiss the whole case for all of these reasons. But I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know if it's going to work. There's a sentiment among a good portion of our federal judiciary that's, I think, so pro-corporate, so concerned about human rights claims coming from, people from other countries victimized by our companies that do business in these other countries. These courts just like almost reflexively try to protect U.S. businesses from foreign plaintiffs. So it's a tough mountain I have to climb, but we're going to keep pushing.
It's like I can just see you holding the floodgates at bay, right? That's what they're scared of, the floodgates opening. So, someone's listening and they've never heard this story and they're going to go and Google and look for information. There's plenty of resources to find the truth. There's also an unbelievable amount of information that Chevron has put out, and including on corporate social responsibility websites and places that I would go for information that I ought to trust. So I recently, and I just wanted to do a search of something that I remember seeing last year, a press release sponsored by Chevron. Say they read a statement from Chevron that says that the Ecuadorian judgment itself has been found as fraud by U.S. courts and an international tribunal in The Hague claiming that the evidence was obtained through fraud, bribery, and corruption. What would you say to that? And what is that international tribunal? And were you under house arrest when that actually took place?
First of all, I'll reiterate, the judgment is based on valid scientific evidence. It's not a product of fraud. Chevron has committed fraud by alleging that it was fraud. That's their fraud. It's a fake narrative. The case has been validated by 4 levels of courts in Ecuador, by 3 appellate courts in Canada for enforcement purposes, by the U.S. Second Circuit Court of Appeals for enforcement purposes. And then you have all these decisions in favor. And then you have this oil company that, paid a witness $2 million to lie about me and claimed I was involved in a bribery. There was 0 corroborating evidence. The witness later admitted lying. A forensic investigation proved he lied. He claimed we ghost wrote the judgment. Did not happen. They created a fake narrative, and then they took it to this U.S. judge, and then separately they sued Ecuador's government, trying to basically shift their liability to Ecuadorian taxpayers. They tried to basically get a taxpayer-funded bailout in Ecuador from the very people they poisoned through this bilateral investment treaty arbitration. All I'll say about that is we were not a party. We never presented evidence. We didn't participate. This is a rigged corporate dispute resolution mechanism that everyone from Hillary Clinton to Bernie Sanders to Donald Trump has criticized. It's held in secret in hotel rooms. They claim it's The Hague, but all they did with The Hague is use the administrative clerk's office of a court in The Hague and act like it's The Hague. It's not. It's a private, secret arbitration for corporations. You see this in the NAFTA agreement. You see this in a lot of bilateral trade agreements. And it's a case that to us has no legitimacy in terms of any application to the Ecuadorians who won the real case through public courts where Chevron accepted jurisdiction, down in Ecuador, and then it's been validated by, again, multiple courts in different countries. So the arbitrators, 3 older white men who live in the North, supposed international law experts, they didn't hear from us. They pretty much recycled Chevron's evidence, fake evidence from this fake witness. I don't think that case has anything to do with anything in terms of the enforcement of the judgment. But of course, Chevron uses it for PR purposes to claim there was some other decision out there against us. But the reality is we were not a party to that decision for various reasons. It has no legitimacy. They never heard the real evidence from us, from our team, and they treated Ecuador's court system with total disrespect. By the way, if people take a step back and you think how extraordinary it is that I, a human rights lawyer, am in detention for 11 months, think about this international arbitration for a second. We were litigating years and years at Chevron's request in Ecuador's courts. According to Chevron, when they lose a case like that, which they did, they have a right to then bypass the courts where they accept the jurisdiction, go to the secret arbitration panel, and these three white men who have no understanding of Ecuadorian law arrogate to themselves the power to nullify a public court decision in Ecuador. I mean, think about it. It is a total attack on the idea of a sovereign judiciary, not only in Ecuador, but the United States and any other country in the world. How does a secret arbitration panel for a corporation get to nullify a Supreme Court decision of any country in the world? Well, they can't. But in their minds, they act like that's what they're doing, which is why this thing has no legitimacy and is not going to be respected by any court in the world. But Chevron does use it for PR purposes to confuse people.
That's why I wanted to ask you that. I really wanted you to clarify that, because after you can't deny what you just heard, everybody. So thank you. Steven, you could have, ducked out a long time ago, and this just keeps going and going. And I know that, there have to be implications personally for you right now and what you're experiencing internally. What can you share with people about your personal experience right now, how you're feeling, and what would you want people to know? We don't want people to stop, achieving, aiming for justice, right? And that's what these attacks are about, to make sure people don't dive in, because if you do, this is what's going to happen. What's your personal experience right now, and what would you want people to know?
Thank you, Stephanie, for the question. I just want to say this. I have had an extraordinarily rich life working on this case. And by the way, I've worked on dozens, hundred or so other cases through the years. This case has taken up the bulk of my time the last 10 years. It's become so big, so important. It's in different countries around the world. We're going up against dozens of law firms. It's very time consuming to sustain the case. So I would encourage lawyers to understand that this work can be done, and it can be done effectively if you design your systems the right way up front, meaning financing, getting the right lawyers, understanding the model you need to have client and grassroots empowerment. So everyone's sort of working off the same song sheet. So it's been a great experience. Now, at the moment, life is very stressful for me because of this detention and the threat that they want to imprison me. I would say falsely imprison me for winning probably one of the most important environmental justice cases in history. Things are happening that I never in my wildest imagination thought could happen in this country, not just to me, but to anybody. So I'm grappling with that, but I'm also gaining tremendous support. 29 Nobel laureates have issued a statement. 475 bar associations and lawyers around the world have signed a letter from the International Association of Democratic Lawyers. I have multiple lawyers representing me pro bono on various aspects of my legal issues. And ultimately, there's a lot of other lawyers in other countries who plan on enforcing the judgment against Chevron's assets and ultimately forcing Chevron to be held, fully accountable. Even though we won the case, full accountability will come only when they comply with the judgment, comply with the rule of law. It's important, I think, to not think of this case as Steven Donziger. I mean, it's very important. This case is way beyond me at this point. It never was my case, never was about me. Chevron wants to make it about me. It's about the people of Ecuador and what happened to them because of Chevron's environmental criminality, Texaco's environmental criminality. On the other hand, it's important people learn about my situation and help me and focus on me, because what we don't want is a world where the lawyers who do this important work and the legal workers and the human rights defenders and the earth defenders and the indigenous leaders who do this work get imprisoned for it and get persecuted for it. And while I know that this happens and has happened a lot all over the world, in Latin America, dozens and dozens of environmental activists are murdered every year by assassins and representatives of corporations and power plants and hydroelectric plants. And Berta Casares in Honduras is an example of this. We don't want lawyers anywhere, and that includes the United States of America, to be persecuted for carrying out their legal right to hold accountable in a court of law those who commit wrongdoing. And that's what's happening to me. So if people want to help, there's a website called makechevroncleanup.com. Sign up for the campaign. We have thousands and thousands of people have signed up to take various actions, and you'll hear from me or others, every few weeks about things that are going on. Just be part of this. And the second thing is I have a legal defense fund. It takes money to deal with what I'm dealing with. That is, pay my pretty modest family living expenses, legal expenses. People are working for the most part pro bono, but there's travel expenses and all sorts of other stuff, expert costs and that kind of stuff. So if people can help financially, go to that site, which is called donzigerdefense.com, DONZIGERDEFENSE.com. And you can donate, anything you can feel comfortable giving. I know times are tough, but, modest amounts are extremely appreciated. I mean, the only way we're really going to deal with this, my situation at this point, is to have a high volume of donations. And that's two ways you can help. Also, follow me on Twitter. I'm at @SDonziger if you want regular updates about the case.
Yeah, we'll share everything with all of you in the show notes. And, it's really all, thank you so much, Steven, for sharing all of this, because it's just it's a window. And I appreciate you saying it. It's not about you. It is about you, but it's really also about justice and defending. We want to defend the opportunity for enforcing environmental justice for earth defenders and human rights defenders. So that's really what we're supporting when we're supporting Steven and his efforts. So thank you so much for being here. Is there any last thing that you want anyone to know? Imagine you're touching the hearts of millions right now. Is there anything that you'd want to share?
Well, I just appreciate, Stephanie, the opportunity to tell the story a little bit. I mean, obviously this has gone on many years. There's so much more to it than the time that I've been able to say in the time we have. But I really appreciate the opportunity to introduce the story to those who don't know about it. And I would just urge people to read. There's articles out there. The recent article in The Nation about me, and Rex Weiler of Greenpeace on the Greenpeace website has written a number of really good articles, big picture articles about what this case means. Learn more about it. Go to our websites. If you have any questions, specifically email them to me or our website, and just get engaged. This is a battle for justice for 30,000 Ecuadorians, for the survival of indigenous groups, for the survival of free speech in the United States. That is the right of lawyers to practice their profession without being persecuted by a corporation. There's a lot at stake, and it's really affects, not just the immediate people involved down in Ecuador who deserve a cleanup and are legally entitled to a cleanup, but really affects everyone who does this work, who cares about human rights and social justice, because this is a very important case, and it's critical that it keep going and that Chevron not be allowed to get away with doing what it's trying to do to my clients and to the lawyers who are representing them. Because if they get away with it, they're going to keep doing it more and more in the coming years. And if they don't get away with it, it's going to happen less and less, and the world will be a better place because of it.
Thank you, Steven. Thank you. And if you're listening to this, just share this widely so that we can get this message out to more and more people who can join and become an ally of this effort. So thank you again for being here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Catalyst Talks. Stay tuned for what's up next, and please subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen. You'll find those links at catalysttalks.com. Join us as we continue this conversation on social media, and if you'd like to reach out to me privately, you can send me a message at stephanietrager.com. Your attention here means the world to me. Thank you.